The smoke was so thick I couldn't see my own hands as I crawled across the burning cabin floor, my lungs screaming for clean air. But it wasn't the fire that broke my heart. It was hearing my own daughter's voice outside, crying, "Oh no, we're too late," while her husband Derek comforted her, knowing full well he had locked me inside to die. You see, some people will do anything for money, even murder the woman who raised the child they claim to love. I'm 72 years old, and I thought I'd seen every kind of human cruelty in my years as a financial advisor. I was wrong. The worst betrayal came from my own family, and it nearly cost me everything: my life, my dignity, and $5 billion that was never meant for him. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Margaret Whitmore, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 72 years old, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had the perfect life. I lived in a beautiful log cabin nestled in the Colorado Rockies, the same cabin my late husband Robert and I built 40 years ago when we were young and full of dreams. The cabin sits on 50 acres of pristine wilderness, surrounded by towering pines and a crystal clear stream that runs year-round. Robert passed away 5 years ago from cancer, and I'd been managing just fine on my own. You might think that's unusual for a woman my age living alone in such a remote location, but I'm not your typical grandmother. I spent 35 years as an investment banker and financial advisor in Denver before retiring. I know how to handle money, and more importantly, I know how to spot when someone's trying to steal it. That expertise is exactly what got me into this mess. After Robert died, I took on the responsibility of managing the Henderson Children's Foundation Trust Fund. It's worth $5 billion. Yes, you heard that right, $5 billion with a B. The foundation was established by tech mogul James Henderson before he passed away, and it provides funding for children's hospitals, educational programs, and medical research across the country. James was a dear friend of Robert's from their Army days, and he trusted us to ensure his money would help children for generations to come. Managing that kind of money requires constant vigilance. Every transaction has to be documented, every investment carefully monitored, and every penny accounted for. It's a huge responsibility, but one I take very seriously. After all, this isn't just money, it's hope for thousands of sick children and their families. My daughter Sarah has always been the light of my life. She's 35 now, a pediatric nurse at Denver Children's Hospital, and she has the biggest heart you could imagine. Sarah met Derek Harrison 8 years ago at a hospital fundraiser. He was charming, well-dressed, and claimed to work in financial consulting. He swept my beautiful daughter off her feet with fancy dinners, expensive gifts, and promises of a wonderful future together. I'll admit, I had reservations about Derek from the beginning. There was something about his smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and he seemed overly interested in my financial background. But Sarah was happy, and after losing Robert, I wanted nothing more than to see my daughter find love and happiness. Derek and Sarah married 6 years ago in a beautiful ceremony at the cabin. I paid for everything, of course. The flowers, the catering, even Derek's expensive suit. He seemed grateful at the time, calling me the best mother-in-law a man could ask for, and promising to take good care of Sarah. I should have trusted my instincts back then, but love makes us blind sometimes, even when we're watching someone else fall in love. For years, everything seemed fine. Derek was attentive to Sarah, and they visited me regularly at the cabin. He would ask thoughtful questions about my work with the foundation, showing what I thought was genuine interest in helping children. He even offered to help with some of the financial paperwork, saying his consulting experience could be valuable. I politely declined, of course. The foundation's bylaws are very strict about who can access the accounts, and besides, I've always been particular about handling such important work myself. Derek seemed to understand, though I noticed a flash of something: disappointment, anger, cross his face before he smiled and said, "Of course, Maggie, you're the expert." The first sign of real trouble came about 6 months ago. I was reviewing the foundation's quarterly reports when I noticed some unusual activity in several smaller accounts that fed into the main trust. Small amounts, a few thousand here and there, were being transferred to accounts I didn't recognize. The transactions were technically legitimate, formatted correctly with proper authorization codes, but something felt wrong. I've been in finance long enough to know that criminals rarely steal large amounts all at once. They take small amounts over time, hoping no one will notice. These transfers fit that pattern perfectly. I spent weeks tracing the money, following a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The stolen funds were eventually ending up in accounts linked to Derek's consulting firm, Harrison Financial Services. My own son-in-law was stealing from a children's charity. I felt sick to my stomach. Not just because of the theft, though that was bad enough, but because of what this meant for Sarah. How could I tell my daughter that her husband was a criminal? How could I destroy her marriage and her trust in the man she loved? I decided I needed more evidence before making such a serious accusation. So I started keeping detailed records, printing out transaction histories, and tracing every suspicious transfer. I opened a safety deposit box in town and stored copies of everything there. I also started a digital backup, storing files on an encrypted hard drive that I kept hidden in Robert's old gun safe. The more I investigated, the worse it got. Derek wasn't just stealing from the foundation, he was running an elaborate scheme, embezzling from multiple clients and using sophisticated methods to cover his tracks. The man was a master manipulator and a skilled financial criminal. 3 weeks ago, I made the mistake of confronting him. Sarah and Derek had come to visit for the weekend, as they did most months. It was a beautiful Saturday evening, and we'd just finished dinner on the deck overlooking the mountains. Sarah had gone inside to call the hospital about a patient she was worried about, leaving Derek and me alone. "Derek," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady, "I need to talk to you about some irregularities I've found in the foundation accounts." His face changed instantly. The charming mask slipped, and for a moment, I saw the real Derek. Cold, calculating, and dangerous. "What kind of irregularities?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Unauthorized transfers. Small amounts, but consistent. They're all traceable back to your consulting firm." Derek was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening forest. When he turned back to me, his smile was back, but it was different now, predatory. "Maggie," he said softly, "I think you might be confused. Managing all that money at your age, well, it's a lot of responsibility. Maybe it's time to consider letting someone younger handle the foundation's affairs." "There's nothing wrong with my mind, Derek," I replied firmly. "And there's nothing wrong with my records. I know what you've been doing." "I see." He leaned back in his chair, studying me like a hawk watching a mouse. "And what exactly do you plan to do with this theory of yours?" "I haven't decided yet. But I thought you should know that I know." That was my first mistake, giving him a warning instead of going straight to the authorities. "I appreciate your discretion, Maggie," Derek said, standing up as Sarah returned to the deck. "We should definitely continue this conversation soon." The rest of the weekend passed without incident, but I could feel Derek watching me constantly. His behavior towards Sarah remained normal, loving, attentive, charming. But whenever she wasn't looking, his eyes were on me, calculating and cold. After they left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible error in judgment. Derek now knew that I was onto him, and a man who would steal from sick children was capable of anything. I should have called the police immediately. I should have told Sarah everything, regardless of how much it would hurt her. I should have transferred the foundation accounts to a more secure location and changed all the access codes. Instead, I convinced myself that I had time to figure out the best way to handle the situation. I told myself that Derek wouldn't do anything drastic, that he would try to cover his tracks or maybe even come clean and return the money. I was wrong about that too. 2 weeks after our confrontation, Derek called to suggest that he and Sarah come up for another visit. "Sarah's been working so hard at the hospital," he said, his voice warm and concerned. "I thought a long weekend in the mountains would do her good." I should have said no. Every instinct I had screamed that Derek was planning something. But I missed my daughter, and part of me hoped that maybe, just maybe, I could still find a way to resolve this situation without destroying her marriage. "Of course," I told him. "You're always welcome here." That was my second mistake, and it nearly cost me my life. They arrived on Friday afternoon, just as the October sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the valley. I watched from my kitchen window as Derek's black SUV wound up the gravel road toward the cabin. Sarah was in the passenger seat, her face bright with excitement at the prospect of a relaxing weekend in the mountains. Derek was driving, his expression hidden behind expensive sunglasses, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. I took a deep breath and smoothed down my sweater. I'd spent the past 2 weeks preparing for this visit, though not in the way most grandmothers would. While I'd stocked the refrigerator with Sarah's favorite foods and fresh flowers throughout the cabin, I'd also made sure all my evidence was safely stored away. The safety deposit box in town held the most damning documents, but I'd also hidden backup files in Robert's gun safe and uploaded everything to a secure cloud storage account. If something happened to me, the truth would still come out. "Mom," Sarah called out as she burst through the front door, her arms already outstretched for a hug. At 35, my daughter was still as beautiful as the day she graduated nursing school. Honey blonde hair, warm brown eyes just like her father's, and a smile that could light up the darkest room. I held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her vanilla perfume, mixed with the antiseptic smell that always clung to her scrubs. "Oh, sweetheart, I've missed you so much." "I've missed you too, Mom." She pulled back to look at me, her trained nurse's eyes scanning my face with concern. "You look tired. Are you sleeping okay up here all by yourself?" Before I could answer, Derek appeared in the doorway, carrying their weekend bags. He'd changed since I last saw him, lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes that his charming smile couldn't quite hide. The stress of covering up his crimes was taking its toll. "Maggie," he said warmly, setting down the bags to give me a careful hug. "You look wonderful, as always. Thank you for having us." "Of course, Derek. Family is always welcome here." He held my gaze for just a moment longer than necessary, and I saw something flicker behind his eyes, a coldness that made my skin crawl. But then Sarah was chattering excitedly about her week at the hospital, and the moment passed. "I brought your favorite wine, Mom," Sarah said, pulling a bottle of Pinot Noir from one of the bags. "The one from that little vineyard we visited last summer." "That's lovely, sweetheart. Why don't you two get settled while I finish preparing dinner?" As they carried their bags to the guest room, I heard Derek's voice through the thin walls. "The cabin's pretty isolated, isn't it? No neighbors for miles." "That's what Mom loves about it," Sarah replied. "Complete peace and quiet. She says it helps her think clearly when she's working on the foundation stuff." "I'm sure it does," Derek murmured, and something in his tone made my hands freeze over the cutting board where I was preparing vegetables. Dinner that evening was a strained affair, at least for me. Sarah chatted happily about her patients, completely oblivious to the undercurrent of tension between Derek and me. He played his part perfectly. The attentive husband, the concerned son-in-law, asking about my health and my work with the foundation. "The foundation must keep you quite busy," he said as I served the apple pie I'd made that afternoon. "All that money to manage, all those decisions to make. It's an enormous responsibility for someone your age." There it was again, the subtle implication that I was too old, too fragile to handle such important work. "I manage just fine," I replied evenly. "I've been handling complex financial matters longer than you've been alive, Derek." Sarah laughed, not noticing the edge in my voice. "Mom's sharper than people half her age. You should see her with the foundation board members. She runs circles around them." "I'm sure she does," Derek said, raising his wine glass in what looked like a toast but felt like a threat. "To Maggie, a truly formidable woman." After dinner, Sarah insisted on doing the dishes while Derek and I moved to the living room. The moment we were alone, the pretense dropped. "We need to finish our conversation from last time," Derek said quietly, settling into Robert's old leather chair like he owned the place. "What conversation?" I asked, though we both knew exactly what he meant. "About the irregularities you think you found. About your confusion regarding the foundation accounts." "I'm not confused, Derek. I know exactly what you've been doing." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like an elderly woman is making serious accusations based on paperwork she might be misinterpreting. The evidence is clear." "What evidence?" he interrupted. "Computer records that could easily be explained as clerical errors. Transfers that went through proper channels with valid authorization codes. Maggie, you're seeing conspiracies where none exist. I've been in this business for over 30 years. I know embezzlement when I see it." Derek was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those cold, calculating eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was different, harder, more direct. "Let's say hypothetically that you're right. Let's say someone has been taking small amounts from various accounts over time. What would you plan to do about it?" My mouth went dry. This was as close to a confession as I was likely to get, and the casual way he said it chilled me to the bone. I would report it to the authorities, I said firmly. Even if it meant destroying your daughter's marriage. Even if it meant Sarah finding out that the man she loves is a criminal, Sarah deserves to know the truth. Derek laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. The truth. The truth is that Sarah is happy. She has a good marriage, a nice house, a comfortable life. She doesn't need to know about any business complications. Business complications? I stood up, anger finally overriding my caution. You're stealing from a children's charity, Derek. From sick kids who need that money for medical treatment and research. Keep your voice down, he hissed, glancing toward the kitchen where Sarah was still cleaning up. And stop being so melodramatic. It's a $5 billion fund. A few million here and there won't make any difference to the big picture. A few million? I stared at him in shock. How much have you stolen? I haven't stolen anything. I've made strategic investments using temporary liquidity transfers. Every penny will be returned with interest. That's what every embezzler says until they get caught. Derek stood up then, moving closer to me until I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something else. The sharp scent of desperation. Here's what's going to happen, Maggie. You're going to realize that your old eyes aren't as sharp as they used to be. You're going to admit that managing such a large fund is too much stress for someone your age. And you're going to recommend that the foundation board appoint a younger, more qualified financial manager to take over the accounts. Someone like you. Someone exactly like me. His smile was reptilian now, all pretense of warmth gone. Think about it. You get to retire gracefully, Sarah stays happy, and everyone wins? And if I refuse? Derek's expression darkened. Then you might have an accident. Falls are so common for elderly people living alone in remote locations. Or maybe a heart attack brought on by stress. Or perhaps a house fire. These old wooden cabins are such fire traps. Especially with all that paper you keep lying around for your research. The blood drained from my face. He wasn't just threatening to expose my confusion or have me declared incompetent. He was threatening to kill me. You wouldn't dare? I whispered. Wouldn't I? I've got $15 million in offshore accounts and a wife who adores me. I've come too far to let an interfering old woman ruin everything now. Before I could respond, Sarah returned from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. What are you two talking about so seriously? Derek's transformation was instant and complete. The cold-blooded criminal vanished, replaced by the loving husband with the warm smile. Just boring financial stuff, sweetheart. Your mom was telling me about some new investment strategies the foundation is considering. Oh, that's nice. Sarah yawned and stretched. I don't know about you two, but I'm exhausted. I think I'm ready for bed. Good idea, Derek said, wrapping his arms around her waist. The fresh mountain air always makes me sleepy too. As they headed toward the guest room, Derek turned back to look at me one last time. Think about what we discussed, Maggie. You have until Sunday to make the right decision. I stood in the empty living room for a long time after they'd gone to bed, my heart pounding and my mind racing. Derek had just threatened my life. And he'd done it with my daughter sleeping in the next room. The man was even more dangerous than I'd imagined. I should have called the police right then. I should have woken Sarah up and told her everything. I should have done anything except what I actually did, which was go to bed and hope that somehow things would look better in the morning. But fear makes you do foolish things sometimes. And I was more frightened than I'd been in my entire life. I lay awake most of that night, listening to every creak and groan of the old cabin, wondering if Derek might decide not to wait until Sunday after all. Every shadow seemed threatening, every sound potentially sinister. When morning finally came, I was exhausted but alive. Derek and Sarah were already up, sitting on the deck with coffee and talking quietly. They looked like any normal couple enjoying a peaceful weekend retreat. If I hadn't heard Derek's threats the night before, I might have believed the illusion myself. Good morning, Mom, Sarah called when she saw me through the sliding glass doors. Derek made coffee. He's actually pretty handy in the kitchen. A man of many talents, I said dryly, accepting the mug Derek offered me with a smile that didn't fool either of us. Sarah and I were thinking of taking a hike today, Derek said casually. Maybe up to Eagle's Peak. Remember you telling us about that trail? Maggie, Eagle's Peak was a 6-hour round-trip hike that would take them far from the cabin. Far from any help if something happened to me while they were gone. That's a long hike, I said carefully. Are you sure you're up for it, Sarah? You've been working such long shifts at the hospital. Actually, I think the exercise would be good for me. I've been sitting at the nurse's station too much lately. Sarah squeezed Derek's hand. Besides, Derek's been looking forward to it. He's been researching hiking trails online for weeks. I'll bet he has, I thought grimly. Well, be careful up there. The weather can change quickly in the mountains. We will be, Derek said, his eyes never leaving my face. You'll have the whole day to yourself to rest and think about things. After breakfast, I watched them pack their hiking gear, water bottles, energy bars, first aid kit, everything they'd need for a day on the mountain. Derek was thorough and well prepared, which somehow made everything more frightening. We should be back by 5 or 6, Sarah said, giving me a long hug goodbye. Will you be okay here by yourself? Of course, sweetheart. I've been taking care of myself for a long time. I know. But still. She pulled back to look at me with concern. Promise me you won't try to do anything strenuous while we're gone. No climbing on ladders or moving heavy things. I promise. Derek stepped forward then, and to my shock, he hugged me too. But as his arms went around me, he whispered in my ear so quietly that only I could hear. Remember what we discussed, Maggie. You have until we get back to make the smart choice. Then he was stepping back with that charming smile, taking Sarah's hand and leading her toward the hiking trail that disappeared into the dense forest behind the cabin. I stood on the deck and watched until they vanished from sight, my heart hammering against my ribs. Derek's final warning had been clear. I had hours to decide whether to give him control of the foundation accounts or face the consequences. But what he didn't know was that I'd already made my decision. I wasn't going to hand over $5 billion to a criminal, no matter what he threatened to do to me. I was going to fight back. The question was whether I was smart enough, strong enough, and lucky enough to survive what was coming. After Derek and Sarah disappeared into the forest, I didn't waste a single moment. I had maybe 6 hours before they returned, and I intended to use every minute wisely. If Derek thought he was dealing with a helpless old woman, he was about to get a very unpleasant surprise. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, Patricia Chun, from the landline in my study. Patricia had been handling my legal affairs for 15 years, and she was one of the sharpest attorneys I'd ever met. Maggie. Patricia's voice was concerned when she heard the tension in my voice. What's wrong? Patricia, I need you to listen carefully. I'm going to email you some documents in the next hour, and I need you to promise me that if anything happens to me, you'll take them immediately to the FBI. There was a pause. Maggie, you're scaring me. What kind of documents? Evidence of embezzlement from the Henderson Foundation. My son-in-law has been stealing from the charity, and he's threatened to kill me if I expose him. Jesus Christ, Maggie. Have you called the police? Not yet. I need to get all the evidence organized first. But Patricia, if something happens to me in the next few days, an accident, a fire, anything, you need to know it wasn't an accident. I'm driving up there right now? No, I said quickly. That would put you in danger too. Just promise me you'll watch for my email and act on it if necessary. Patricia was quiet for a moment. I promise. But Maggie, please be careful. If this man is as dangerous as you say, I know. I'm going to be very careful. After hanging up with Patricia, I spent the next 2 hours organizing every piece of evidence I'd gathered about Derek's crimes. Bank statements, transaction records, traced payments to shell companies, copies of forged authorization codes, everything that would prove his guilt beyond any doubt. I uploaded it all to Patricia's secure email server, then made additional copies on 3 separate flash drives. I hid one in the coffee canister in the kitchen, another inside the frame of a family photo on my nightstand, and the third I tucked into my bra. If Derek searched the cabin, he might find the first 2, but he'd never find the third. Next, I called my old friend Jack Morrison, who lived about 20 miles down the mountain. Jack was a retired police detective who'd worked financial crimes for 30 years before moving to Colorado. I'd helped him set up his retirement investments, and we'd stayed in touch. Maggie, good to hear from you. Jack's gruff voice came through the phone. How are you holding up out there? Jack, I need a favor, a big one. I explained the situation as quickly as I could, knowing that time was running short. Jack listened without interrupting, his years of police training evident in his focused questions. This son-in-law of yours? Jack said when I finished. He's made direct threats against your life. Last night, he said accidents happen to elderly people living alone, falls, heart attacks, house fires. Son of a bitch. Jack's voice hardened. Maggie, you need to get out of that cabin right now. I can't. My daughter is with him, and she doesn't know what kind of man she married. If I disappear now, he'll convince her that I'm having some kind of mental breakdown. He might even hurt Sarah if he thinks she's a liability. Then we call the state police and have them arrest him. On what charges? I have financial evidence of embezzlement. But proving he threatened to kill me is my word against his. A good lawyer could get him out on bail within hours, and then Sarah would be alone with him. Jack was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear him thinking through the tactical situation. What do you need from me? I need backup. If something happens to me today, I need someone who knows the truth and can act on it immediately. Consider it done. But Maggie, I'm driving up there anyway. I'll park down the road where they can't see my truck. And I'll keep watch. Jack, you don't have to. The hell I don't. You're talking about a man who's willing to commit murder for money. I'm not leaving you to face that alone. After arranging the call schedule with Jack, I had one more piece of preparation to complete, the most important one. Robert had been a careful man, and when we built the cabin, he'd insisted on certain security features that most people would consider paranoia. At the time, I thought it was overkill. Now, those precautions might save my life. Hidden behind a false panel in our bedroom closet was what Robert had called our safe room, a reinforced space about the size of a large walk-in closet, with its own air filtration system, emergency supplies, and communication equipment. Robert had been worried about home invasions in such an isolated location, and he'd wanted to make sure we had somewhere to retreat if criminals ever targeted the cabin. The safe room had an independent phone line that Derek wouldn't know about, a battery, powered radio, medical supplies, and enough food and water for several days. Most importantly, it had fireproof walls and its own ventilation system that couldn't be compromised from outside. I spent an hour checking all the systems, making sure the batteries were charged and the phone line was working. Then I hid additional copies of Derek's financial crimes in a sealed container inside the safe room. If the worst happened, the evidence would survive even if I didn't. By 3 o'clock, I was as prepared as I could be. Now all I could do was wait and see what Derek would do when he returned. I tried to keep myself busy with normal afternoon activities, reading, knitting, preparing dinner for when Sarah got back from the hike. But every sound made me jump, every shadow seemed threatening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living through my last few hours of normal life. At 4:30, I was in the kitchen starting to marinate chicken for dinner when I heard footsteps on the front deck. My heart lurched, but I forced myself to stay calm. It was too early for them to be back from Eagle's Peak, unless they'd cut the hike short. Through the kitchen window, I saw Derek climbing the steps to the front door. He was alone. My blood turned to ice. Where was Sarah? Why had he come back without her? Derek knocked on the front door, which was strange since he'd never knocked before. Maggie, it's me. I need to come in. I walked slowly to the door, my mind racing through possibilities. Had something happened to Sarah on the hike? Was she hurt? Or had Derek done something to her? Derek, I called through the door. Where's Sarah? Is she all right? She's fine. Derek's voice was calm, almost cheerful. She decided to continue up to the summit while I came back early. I wasn't feeling well. Altitude sickness, I think. Can you let me in? Every instinct I had screamed that this was a lie. Sarah would never have continued a dangerous hike alone. Especially not if Derek was feeling sick. She was a nurse. She would have insisted on coming back with him to make sure he was okay. But I had to know for sure. I had to give him a chance to prove me wrong, even though I was almost certain he was lying. I opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged. Derek stood on the other side, looking pale and slightly out of breath, as if he really had hiked back quickly from the mountain trail. Are you sure Sarah's okay? I asked. It's not like her to hike alone. She's with a group of other hikers we met on the trail, Derek said, his story getting more elaborate. A family from Texas with teenage kids. She felt safe with them, and she really wanted to see the view from the summit. It was a good lie, detailed enough to sound plausible. But I knew my daughter better than anyone, and she would never have let Derek come back alone if he was genuinely sick. I just need to lie down for a few minutes. Derek continued. Maybe get some aspirin for the headache. Against my better judgment, I undid the security chain and opened the door. Derek stepped inside, and immediately I could see that something was different about him. The mask of charm was completely gone, replaced by cold calculation. Thank you, he said quietly, closing the door behind him and turning the deadbolt lock. Derek, what's really going on? Where is Sarah? He turned to face me then, and what I saw in his eyes made my knees weak. This wasn't the Derek who'd shared dinner with us last night, or even the man who'd threatened me on the deck. This was someone who'd crossed a line and was now capable of anything. Sarah is exactly where she needs to be, he said softly. Far away from here, with a solid alibi, so when the authorities investigate your tragic accident, she'll be completely in the clear. What did you do to her? Nothing. She's perfectly safe, hiking with that family from Texas just like I said. I told her I was feeling dizzy and needed to rest, and she agreed to continue with the other group. She thinks I'm taking a nap right now. The relief I felt that Sarah was safe was quickly overwhelmed by the realization of what Derek's plan really was. He'd deliberately separated himself from Sarah so she'd have an alibi when I died. He'd thought of everything. You have one last chance, Maggie, Derek said, moving slowly toward me as I backed away toward the kitchen. Sign the papers transferring Foundation authority to me, and I'll make this quick and painless. A simple heart attack brought on by stress. Very believable for a woman your age. And if I refuse? Derek smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen. Then it won't be quick, and it won't be painless. But the end result will be the same. I continued backing away, my mind frantically calculating distances and options. The safe room was upstairs, but Derek was between me and the staircase. My nearest phone was in the kitchen, but he could reach me before I could dial for help. You'll never get away with this, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. People will ask questions. Will they? A 72-year-old woman living alone in a remote cabin dies of what appears to be natural causes. Sarah will be devastated but not suspicious. I'll comfort her through her grief, help her settle your estate, and gradually take over the Foundation's management. Everyone will see it as me stepping up to help my grieving wife honor her mother's legacy. The evidence? What evidence? Some financial records that could easily be explained as the confused suspicions of an elderly woman under stress. I'll make sure those disappear along with you. We'd reached the kitchen now, and Derek was close enough that I could see the cold intelligence in his eyes. He'd planned this carefully, considering every angle, preparing for every contingency. Except one. He didn't know about the safe room. He didn't know about Jack Morrison watching from down the mountain. And he didn't know that I'd already sent copies of all the evidence to my lawyer. How? I asked, still backing away. How are you going to make it look natural? Derek reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small bottle of pills. Digitalis. Sarah uses it at the hospital for patients with heart conditions. A massive overdose will trigger cardiac arrest, and since you've never been tested for digitalis, the coroner will assume you had an undiagnosed heart condition that finally caught up with you. Sarah will know those pills are missing. No, she won't. I've been taking a few at a time over the past several months, building up a supply. Sarah thinks the hospital pharmacy has been having inventory issues. He'd been planning this for months. The cold-blooded calculation of it made me sick. Please, I said, playing the role of the frightened old woman he expected me to be. Don't do this. Think about Sarah. Think about what this will do to her. Sarah will inherit everything, and I'll make sure she's comfortable for the rest of her life. She'll never have to know what kind of man her mother really was, the kind who would destroy her daughter's marriage over a few missing dollars from a charity account. Derek opened the pill bottle and shook several tablets into his palm. No, you can take these willingly, or I can force them down your throat. But either way, you're taking them. That's when I made my move. I grabbed the cast iron skillet from the stove and swung it as hard as I could at Derek's head. But at 72, I'm not as quick as I used to be. Derek saw it coming and ducked, the skillet grazing his shoulder instead of connecting solidly with his skull. You bitch! Derek lunged forward, grabbing my wrist and twisting until I dropped the skillet. You just made this so much harder on yourself. I tried to run, but Derek was younger, stronger, and faster. He caught me before I'd gone 3 steps, wrapping one arm around my throat while his other hand forced my mouth open. Swallow the pills, Maggie, or I'll break your jaw. But as Derek tried to force the digitalis into my mouth, I bit down hard on his fingers. He screamed and jerked his hand back, and I managed to spit out the pills before they dissolved. Fine. Derek snarled, blood dripping from his bitten fingers. We'll do this the hard way. He shoved me roughly into a kitchen chair and began looking through the drawers, clearly searching for rope or something to tie me with. I knew this was my last chance to escape. While Derek's back was turned, I slipped out of the chair and ran for the staircase. Behind me, I could hear Derek cursing and giving chase. But I had a small head start. I made it to the top of the stairs and into my bedroom before Derek caught up with me. As he burst through the bedroom door, I was already opening the hidden panel in the closet. What the hell? Derek stopped in confusion as I disappeared into what looked like a solid wall. I slammed the reinforced door of the safe room behind me and engaged the electronic lock. For the moment, I was safe. But Derek was smart, and it wouldn't take him long to figure out what had happened. Through the door, I could hear him pounding on the walls, searching for the entrance to my hiding place. I picked up the emergency phone and dialed Jack Morrison's number. "Jack, it's Maggie. He's here. And he just tried to kill me. I'm in the safe room, but I don't know how long I can stay hidden. I'm calling the state police right now." Jack's voice was tight with anger and concern. "Hold tight, Maggie. Help is coming." But as I hung up the phone, I smelled something that made my blood run cold. Smoke. Derek had found a different way to kill me. If he couldn't get into my safe room, he was going to burn down the entire cabin with me inside it. The smell of smoke was getting stronger by the second, seeping through the ventilation system despite the safe room's filters. I could hear Derek moving around in the bedroom above me, and then his footsteps retreating down the hallway. The sound of breaking glass followed. He was smashing windows to give the fire more oxygen, to make sure the cabin burned completely. My hands were shaking as I tried to think through my options. The safe room was fireproof, but it wasn't designed to withstand a complete house fire. The ventilation system would eventually be overwhelmed, and even if the walls held, I could still die from smoke inhalation. I picked up the emergency phone to call Jack again, but the line was dead. Derek must have cut the phone cables to the house before starting the fire. The cell tower was too far away to get a signal from inside the reinforced room, and my landline was my only connection to the outside world. Or was it? Robert had installed a battery-powered emergency radio in the safe room, tuned to the local emergency frequency. It was designed for receiving weather alerts and emergency broadcasts, but it also had a transmit function for true emergencies. I'd never used it before, but I remembered Robert showing me how it worked. My fingers fumbled with the controls as smoke began to filter more heavily through the air vents. Finally, I found the right frequency and pressed the transmit button. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Margaret Whitmore at 1247 Pine Ridge Road. House fire in progress, suspect arson. I'm trapped in a safe room. Please send help immediately." I released the button and listened for a response. Static filled the room for several long seconds, and then a calm voice came through the speaker. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is Colorado State Emergency Services. We've received your transmission and are dispatching fire and rescue units to your location. Can you confirm you're in immediate danger?" "Yes," I gasped as another wave of smoke made me cough. The fire was set deliberately. "My son-in-law is trying to kill me. There's evidence of his crimes hidden throughout the house. Please tell the investigators to look for it. Mom, fire and rescue are en route. Estimated arrival 15 minutes. Can you maintain your position until then?" 15 minutes. I looked around the small safe room, calculating how long my air would last with the ventilation system compromised. The space was about 6 feet by 8 feet, and I was already feeling lightheaded from the smoke and stress. "I'll try," I told the dispatcher, "but please hurry." Above me, I could hear the fire spreading through the house. The old wooden beams were crackling and popping as they burned, and something heavy crashed to the floor, probably part of the roof starting to collapse. I tried to stay calm, but terror was clawing at my chest. This wasn't how I'd imagined dying. I'd always thought I'd pass peacefully in my sleep, or maybe quietly in a hospital bed with Sarah holding my hand. I never dreamed I'd die in a fire set by my own son-in-law. Through the flames above, I could hear Derek's voice calling out in mock panic. "Maggie! Maggie, where are you? The house is on fire!" He was setting up his alibi, pretending to search for me while the cabin burned. When the fire department arrived, they'd find Derek outside, distraught and desperate, claiming he'd tried everything to find me, but the fire had spread too quickly. The smoke was getting thicker now, and I was having trouble breathing, even with my shirt pulled up over my nose and mouth. I fumbled through the emergency supplies and found a small oxygen canister with a mask attachment. It wasn't much, maybe 30 minutes of air, but it might be enough to keep me alive until help arrived. As I strapped on the oxygen mask, I heard new sounds from outside the house. Shouting voices, the sound of vehicles pulling up the gravel driveway. My heart leaped with hope. The fire department was here. But then I heard Derek's voice, clearer now as he moved outside to meet the first responders. "Thank God you're here! My mother-in-law is trapped inside somewhere. I've been calling for her, but I can't find her." The fire spread so fast, I barely made it out myself. "Sir, step back and let us do our job," came the gruff reply of what sounded like a fire chief. "Do you know where she might be?" "Does she have a bedroom on the ground floor?" "Upstairs," Derek said, his voice breaking with what sounded like genuine emotion. "Her bedroom is upstairs, but the whole second floor is engulfed. I tried to get to her, but the stairs collapsed. I wanted to scream, to tell them I was down here, alive and safe for the moment. But the radio was receive only now. I could hear the emergency frequency chatter, but I couldn't transmit without switching to the emergency channel, and I was afraid I'd lose contact with the dispatcher if I changed frequencies." Above me, the fire was getting worse. I could hear the firefighters shouting orders, the sound of water hitting burning wood, but they were focusing their efforts on the upper floors where they thought I was trapped. The oxygen from the small canister was helping, but I was still getting dizzy from the smoke. The safe room's air filtration system had been overwhelmed, and poisonous gases were seeping in despite the sealed construction. Through the radio chatter, I heard the fire chief's voice. "We've got complete structural collapse on the second floor. If there was anyone up there, they're gone." "No." Derek's anguished cry sounded completely genuine. "She was such a good woman. She didn't deserve this." The irony was sickening. Derek was giving an Oscar-worthy performance of a grieving son-in-law while standing over what he thought was my grave. I was starting to feel confused and disoriented from the smoke inhalation. My thoughts were becoming fuzzy, and I was having trouble focusing on what I needed to do to survive. The oxygen canister was running low, and I could feel myself slipping toward unconsciousness. But then I remembered Sarah, and anger cut through the fog in my brain like a knife. Derek wasn't just killing me, he was destroying my daughter's life. She would live with the guilt of leaving me alone during the fire, never knowing that her beloved husband had murdered her mother for money. I couldn't let that happen. I had to survive, not just for myself but for Sarah. I forced myself to think clearly about my situation. The safe room was holding structurally, but the air was running out. The firefighters were focused on the wrong part of the house, and Derek was outside spinning his web of lies. I needed to find a way to signal my location without revealing myself to Derek. That's when I remembered the emergency beacon. Robert had installed a small emergency locator beacon in the safe room, the kind used by hikers and mountain climbers. It sent out a GPS signal that could be picked up by search and rescue teams. I'd forgotten about it in my panic, but now it might be my salvation. With shaking hands, I found the beacon and activated it. The small device began transmitting my exact location to emergency services. It would take a few minutes for them to receive and interpret the signal, but eventually they'd realize that someone was alive in the basement level of the house. Through the radio, I heard a new voice. Someone from search and rescue. "Fire chief? We're picking up an emergency beacon signal from inside the structure. Ground level, southwest corner." "That's impossible," the fire chief replied. "The whole house is involved. Nobody could survive in there. The signal is strong and current. Someone activated that beacon within the last few minutes." There was a pause, and then I heard the fire chief barking new orders. "Johnson, take a team around to the south side. We've got a possible survivor in the lower level." Outside, Derek's voice rose in what sounded like confusion and hope. Could it really be Maggie? Could she be alive down there? "Stay back, sir," came the reply. "Let us handle this." I could hear the rescue team moving around the outside of the house, looking for an entrance to the lower level. The problem was, there wasn't one. At least not one that they could see. Robert had designed the safe room entrance to be completely hidden, accessible only from inside the house. But Robert had also installed an emergency exit that I'd forgotten about in my panic. A narrow tunnel that led from the safe room to a concealed opening about 50 yards from the house. Camouflaged as a natural depression in the forest floor, the tunnel was barely wide enough for one person to crawl through, and it would be a claustrophobic nightmare under the best circumstances. With smoke and limited air, it might be impossible, but it was my only chance. I gathered the most important evidence files, stuffed them into a waterproof bag, and strapped it to my back. Then I opened the tunnel entrance and stared into the narrow, dark passage that might lead to freedom or become my tomb. Behind me, the safe room was filling with smoke despite the filtration system. Ahead of me was a tunnel that I wasn't sure I could navigate, leading to an exit that might be blocked or discovered by Derek. But staying meant certain death, and I hadn't come this far to give up now. I took a deep breath from the nearly empty oxygen canister, pulled my shirt back over my nose and mouth, and began crawling into the tunnel. The passage was even narrower than I remembered from Robert's original tour, and my 72-year-old joints protested with every movement. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the small flashlight I'd grabbed from the emergency supplies. Behind me, I could hear the fire getting worse, the sound of more structural collapse as the cabin was consumed. But I kept crawling forward, one painful foot at a time, driven by the knowledge that Derek thought he had won. He was out there right now, comforting the firefighters, replaying the role of the devastated family member, while secretly celebrating my death. He had no idea that I was very much alive, and that I was about to turn his perfect crime into his worst nightmare. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, but finally I saw a faint glow of light ahead, not the orange glow of fire, but the natural light of evening filtering through the camouflaged exit. I was almost free, as I pushed through the concealed opening and emerged into the forest, gasping clean air into my smoke-damaged lungs. I could hear the chaos at the house behind me. Firefighters shouting, water pumps running, and Derek's voice still calling out in fake anguish for his beloved mother-in-law. I stayed hidden in the trees, catching my breath and assessing my situation. I was alive, I had the evidence, and Derek still thought he had committed the perfect crime. Now I needed to figure out how to use those advantages to bring him to justice. But first I had to make sure Sarah was truly safe, and that Derek hadn't hurt her when he'd separated from her on the hiking trail. From my hiding spot in the forest, I could see the activity around the burning cabin. Fire trucks, ambulances, and police cars filled the clearing. Derek was standing with a group of firefighters, his face a mask of grief and concern. He was still wearing his hiking clothes, still playing the role of the innocent husband who'd returned early from a hike to find tragedy. What he didn't know was that his victim was watching him from the shadows, very much alive, and planning his downfall. The game wasn't over, it was just beginning. From my hiding spot in the dense pine forest, I watched the controlled chaos around my burning cabin. The fire department had brought the blaze under control, but the damage was devastating. My beautiful home, the place where Robert and I had shared 40 years of memories, was nothing but charred beams and smoldering ash. But I was alive, and Derek didn't know it. That gave me the most powerful weapon of all, the element of surprise. I stayed hidden until well after midnight, watching as the last of the emergency vehicles pulled away. Derek had given his statement to the fire marshal and the county sheriff, playing his role perfectly. I'd heard enough of their conversation to understand his story. He'd returned early from the hike feeling sick, found the cabin already on fire, and desperately tried to find me before being forced to retreat by the advancing flames. The authorities were treating it as a tragic accident. An elderly woman probably died of smoke inhalation when an electrical fault or kitchen fire spread faster than she could escape. They had no reason to suspect murder, and Derek's grief seemed genuine to everyone who saw it. After the last police car disappeared down the mountain road, Derek stood alone in front of the ruins of my home. In the moonlight, I could see his face clearly for the first time since the fire started. The mask of grief had finally slipped, replaced by something that made my blood run cold: satisfaction. He thought he'd won. He believed he'd committed the perfect crime. Derek walked slowly around the perimeter of the burned cabin, and I realized he was looking for something, probably trying to make sure there was nothing left that could link him to the fire. After a few minutes, he seemed satisfied that the evidence had been destroyed along with everything else. He pulled out his cell phone and made a call. Even from my hiding spot 50 yards away, I could hear his voice in the still mountain air. Sarah, I have terrible news." His voice broke convincingly, as if the emotions were real instead of carefully manufactured. "There's been an accident. A fire at your mom's cabin. She didn't make it out." I couldn't hear Sarah's response, but I could imagine her shock and devastation. My heart ached for my daughter, knowing the pain she was feeling while having no idea that her husband was the one who'd caused it. No, I tried everything," Derek continued, his voice thick with fake emotion. "I got back from the hike early because I wasn't feeling well, and the whole place was already in flames. I searched everywhere I could reach, called her name, but the fire department said she was probably overcome by smoke before she could get out. There was a pause as Sarah spoke, probably asking if he was hurt or if there was anything she could do. I'm okay physically, but I'm devastated. I loved your mother, Sarah. She was like a real mother to me. The lie came so smoothly, so convincingly, that if I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed it myself. I keep thinking I should have done more, should have found a way to save her. More conversation, and then, yes, I'll stay at the motel in town tonight. The cabin is completely destroyed. There's nothing salvageable. I'll start making arrangements in the morning for the memorial service. Your mom deserves something beautiful. After he hung up, Derek stood in the darkness for a few more minutes, staring at the ruins. Then he walked to his SUV and drove away, leaving me alone with the smoldering remains of my life. But I wasn't ready to mourn yet. I had work to do. The first priority was getting to a phone to contact Jack Morrison and my lawyer Patricia Chen. They needed to know I was alive before Derek had a chance to manipulate the official investigation. I also needed to warn them that Derek might try to eliminate anyone who posed a threat to his story. I made my way through the forest to the hiking trail that led down the mountain toward town. It was a difficult journey in the dark, especially for someone who just survived a house fire and crawled through a smoke-filled tunnel. My lungs were still burning, my clothes were filthy, and every muscle in my body ached. But I kept moving, driven by the knowledge that Derek's plan was just beginning. He didn't just want me dead. He wanted control of the Henderson Foundation's $5 billion. With me gone and Sarah devastated by grief, he would position himself as the logical choice to take over the foundation's management. He'd probably play the role of the dutiful son-in-law, honoring his beloved mother-in-law's memory by continuing her charitable work. The nearest house was Jack Morrison's place, about 4 miles down the mountain by trail. It took me nearly 3 hours to reach it, stumbling through the darkness with only the small flashlight I'd grabbed from the safe room. By the time I reached Jack's driveway, I was exhausted, dehydrated, and probably in mild shock. But I was alive, and I had evidence that would destroy Derek Harrison. Jack's porch light came on before I even reached the front door. He must have been watching for me, probably monitoring police scanners, and staying alert for any news about the fire.
Jesus Christ, Maggie!
Jack pulled me inside, his weathered face filled with relief and concern. When I heard about the fire on the scanner, I thought, "Hell, I thought you were dead." "Derek thinks I am too," I said, collapsing into Jack's living room chair. "That's exactly what I want him to think." Jack poured me a glass of water and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders while I explained what had happened. His expression grew darker with every detail. Derek's separation from Sarah on the hiking trail, the murder attempt with Digitalis, the arson, and Derek's Oscar-worthy performance for the first responders. "That son of a bitch," Jack muttered when I finished. "We need to call the state police right now." "Not yet," I said. "Derek's story is too good, and he's covered his tracks too well. If we reveal that I'm alive before I can prove he tried to murder me, he'll just claim I'm suffering from smoke inhalation and trauma-induced delusions." "But you have evidence of the embezzlement. Financial evidence that proves he stole money. But nothing that directly links him to attempted murder and arson. A good defense attorney could argue that I discovered his financial crimes and tried to frame him for attempted murder to cover up my own mismanagement of the foundation." Jack leaned back in his chair, his cop instincts taking over. "So what's the plan?" "Derek thinks I'm dead, which means he's going to get careless. He'll start moving on the foundation accounts faster than he originally planned, probably using Sarah's grief to justify quick decisions about the trust management. He might even try to access my personal accounts and safety deposit box. And when he does, exactly. But first, I need to make sure Sarah is safe. Derek has already killed once. If he thinks Sarah suspects anything, he might hurt her too." Jack nodded grimly. "What do you need from me?" "A secure phone line to call Patricia Chen, my lawyer. She has copies of all the evidence I gathered about Derek's embezzlement. I need her to know I'm alive and to start preparing a case that will stick. Then I need you to drive me to Denver." "Denver? Maggie, you should be in a hospital." "I should be dead," I corrected. "But I'm not, and that gives us an advantage we can't waste. I need to get to my safety deposit box and gather more evidence before Derek realizes I might have survived. And I need to be close to Sarah in case Derek tries to hurt her." Jack studied my face in the lamplight, probably seeing the determination there despite my smoke, damaged voice and disheveled appearance. "You know this is dangerous as hell, right? If Derek figures out you're alive, Then he'll try to kill me again, but this time, I'll be ready for him. While Jack made coffee and found me some clean clothes that belonged to his late wife, I called Patricia from his secure landline. Patricia was awake despite the late hour. She'd been monitoring news reports about the fire and was devastated by what she thought was my death. "Patricia, listen carefully," I said when she answered. "I'm alive, but Derek doesn't know it. He tried to murder me tonight, and we need to move fast before he realizes his plan failed." There was a long silence, and then Patricia's voice came back, sharp and focused. "Where are you? Are you injured?" "I'm safe for now, but Derek is going to move quickly on the foundation accounts. He'll probably contact you within the next few days claiming to represent Sarah's interests in settling my estate. I'll stall him as long as possible, but Maggie, you need to surface soon. If Derek is as dangerous as you say, staying hidden puts you and Sarah both at risk. I know, but I need 48 hours to gather enough evidence to make this stick. Can you give me that?" "I'll do whatever you need, but promise me you'll be careful." After I hung up with Patricia, Jack and I spent the rest of the night planning our next moves. By dawn, we had a strategy that might just work, if we could stay ahead of Derek, and if I could resist the urge to contact Sarah directly. The hardest part was knowing that my daughter was grieving for me, probably blaming herself for leaving me alone during the fire. But if I revealed myself too soon, Derek would have time to cover his tracks and disappear. He might even hurt Sarah to keep her from testifying against him. So I had to stay dead, at least for now. I had to let my daughter suffer through what she thought was my death, while I gathered the evidence to prove that her husband was a cold-blooded killer. As the sun rose over the Colorado mountains, Jack and I climbed into his old pickup truck and started the drive to Denver. In the rearview mirror, I could see smoke still rising from the ruins of my cabin, the place where Derek thought he'd committed the perfect crime. He had no idea that his victim was about to become his worst nightmare. But before I could bring Derek to justice, I had to make sure Sarah was safe, free, and that meant getting close enough to watch her without Derek knowing I was alive. A dangerous game that could cost us both our lives if I made even one mistake. The drive to Denver would take 3 hours. I had that long to figure out how to protect my daughter from the monster she'd married, while staying invisible to the man who thought he'd already killed me. In the distance, church bells were ringing across the valley, calling people to Sunday morning services. The irony wasn't lost on me. While good people were gathering to pray and worship, I was planning to expose a killer who'd hidden behind the mask of a loving family man. Derek had made one crucial mistake when he tried to murder me. He'd assumed that a 72-year-old woman would be an easy victim, someone he could manipulate and eliminate without consequence. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Jack dropped me off at a small motel on the outskirts of Denver, the kind of place that didn't ask too many questions and accepted cash payments. I registered under a false name, Mary Watson, and paid for a week in advance. The room was basic but clean, and most importantly, it had a clear view of the parking lot in case Derek somehow tracked me down. My first stop was the bank where I kept my safety deposit box. I'd called ahead and spoken to the manager, a woman named Linda Roswell who'd handled my accounts for over a decade. Linda was shocked to hear from me. News of my supposed death had already reached the Denver banking community. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank God you're alive," Linda said when I arrived at her office, still wearing Jack's wife's borrowed clothes and probably looking like I'd been through hell. "When we heard about the fire, everyone here was devastated. Linda, I need you to listen very carefully," I said, closing her office door behind me. "Officially, I'm still dead. My son-in-law tried to murder me last night, and he can't know I survived until I have enough evidence to put him in prison." Linda's face went pale. "Should I call the police?" "Not yet. But I need you to do something for me. Derek Harrison is going to contact you within the next few days, probably claiming to represent my daughter's interests in settling my estate. When he does, I need you to record every conversation and document every request he makes." "Of course, but Mrs. Whitmore, are you sure you shouldn't?" "I'm sure. Derek is smart and careful, but he's also greedy. His greed is going to be what destroys him." I spent an hour in the bank's private viewing room, going through the contents of my safety deposit box. In addition to the financial evidence I'd already gathered about Derek's embezzlement, I found something even more valuable, a series of handwritten notes that Robert had kept about Derek during their first few meetings. Robert had been suspicious of Derek from the beginning, But he'd never shared those concerns with me directly. Instead, he'd documented his observations in careful detail, Derek's evasive answers about his financial background, inconsistencies in his stories about previous jobs, and what Robert called predatory behavior toward me whenever money was discussed. Derek Harrison shows classic signs of financial manipulation, Robert had written in his careful handwriting. He's charming and attentive, but his interest in Maggie increases significantly whenever she discusses the foundation or her personal investments. I believe he married Sarah to gain access to family financial resources. My husband had been dead on accurate, but he died before Derek's true nature became apparent. Now his observations would help convict the man who'd tried to murder his widow. I made copies of everything and stored the originals in a new safety deposit box at a different bank across town. Then I drove Jack's pickup truck to Sarah's neighborhood to begin my surveillance. Sarah and Derek lived in a beautiful craftsman-style house in the Cherry Creek area, a upscale neighborhood that Derek's consulting salary shouldn't have been able to afford. But I knew where the money had really come from. The children's charity he'd been systematically robbing for months. I parked across the street and down the block, using binoculars to watch the house. Derek's black SUV was in the driveway, and through the front windows, I could see him moving around inside. Even from a distance, his body language looked different, more confident, more relaxed. He thought he'd won. At 10:30 in the morning, Sarah's Honda pulled into the driveway. She'd driven back from the hiking area where Derek had left her, probably racing home as soon as she got his call about the fire. My heart broke as I watched her get out of the car. Her shoulders were shaking with grief, and even from across the street, I could see that she'd been crying. Derek met her at the front door, wrapping her in what looked like a loving, supportive embrace. To any neighbor watching, he was the perfect husband comforting his wife through a terrible tragedy. But I knew the truth. He was holding the daughter of the woman he'd just murdered. They disappeared inside the house, and I settled in for a long wait. Surveillance was mostly about patience, something I'd learned during my years in financial investigations. People revealed their true selves when they thought no one was watching. Around noon, Derek emerged from the house alone. Sarah's car was still in the driveway, but Derek was dressed in business attire, expensive suit, leather briefcase, the uniform of a man with important financial matters to attend to. He was moving faster than I'd expected. Most killers would wait at least a few days before capitalizing on their victim's death, but Derek's greed was driving him to act immediately. I followed him at a safe distance as he drove to downtown Denver. He parked at a high-rise building that housed several financial firms, including the offices of Henderson Foundation's board of directors. Derek was making his play for control of the $5 billion, less than 12 hours after trying to kill me. I couldn't follow him inside without being recognized, so I waited in the parking garage and made some phone calls. Patricia Chen confirmed that Derek had already contacted her office that morning, requesting an emergency meeting about my estate and the foundation's management transition. "He's moving incredibly fast," Patricia said. "Most people would wait at least a week before dealing with financial matters after a family death. Derek seems almost eager to get started. That's because he knows exactly what he wants and how to get it." "What did you tell him?" "That estate matters take time to process, and the foundation has specific procedures for management transitions. I bought us maybe 48 hours before he starts pressuring for immediate action." Derek emerged from the building 3 hours later, looking pleased with himself. He'd probably met with the foundation board, expressing his devastation over my tragic death and his willingness to step in and help manage the trust during this difficult transition period. But the foundation board didn't know about Derek's embezzlement, and they didn't know he'd murdered me to gain access to their accounts. That evening, I watched from my car as Derek and Sarah sat on their front porch, Derek's arm around Sarah's shoulders as she cried for the mother she thought she'd lost. The sight of my daughter's grief filled me with rage, but I forced myself to stay calm and focused. Derek was playing his part perfectly, but I noticed something that gave me hope. Even in her grief, Sarah seemed uncomfortable with Derek's behavior. She kept pulling away from his embraces, and several times she gave him looks that suggested she was troubled by something. Maybe my daughter's nursing instincts were picking up on something wrong with Derek's performance. Nurses were trained to recognize when people were hiding pain or pretending to be something they weren't. Later that night, I broke into Derek's consulting office. I know how that sounds, a 72-year-old woman breaking into a downtown office building like some kind of elderly cat burglar. But I'd learned a few unconventional skills during my years investigating financial crimes, and Jack Morrison had taught me a few more during our drive to Denver. Derek's office was on the 15th floor of a modern building with decent but not sophisticated security. The night watchman was more interested in his tablet than the security monitors, and the electronic locks were the kind that could be bypassed with patience and the right tools. Derek's private office was exactly what I'd expected: expensive furniture, impressive diplomas on the walls, and family photos featuring him and Sarah looking happy and successful. But the real treasure was in his computer files. Derek had been careless with his digital security, probably because he'd never expected anyone to go looking for evidence of his crimes. His computer password was Sarah's birthday, and he'd kept detailed records of every financial transaction he'd made over the past 2 years. What I found was even worse than I'd imagined. Derek hadn't just been stealing from the Henderson Foundation, he'd been running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, using money from new clients to pay returns to earlier investors while skimming millions for himself. The Henderson Foundation was just his biggest score, but he'd been systematically robbing dozens of smaller clients for months. Elderly investors, small charities, even a children's hospital in Colorado Springs. Derek had stolen from anyone who trusted him with their money. I copied everything to a portable hard drive, then spent another hour searching through his physical files. Hidden in a locked drawer, I found something that made my blood run cold: detailed surveillance photos of me taken over the past several months. Derek had been watching me for a long time, documenting my daily routines, my trips to the bank, even my visits to the foundation offices. He'd been planning my murder for months, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. But in one of the photo files, I found something that would destroy him completely. Pictures of Derek meeting with known criminals, money launderers, offshore account specialists, the kind of people you only dealt with if you were running a major financial conspiracy. I was so focused on copying the files that I almost missed the sound of the elevator opening in the hallway outside. Someone was coming up to Derek's floor at 2 in the morning, and there was only one reason someone would be here at this hour. Derek had returned to his office. I quickly shut down his computer and grabbed the portable hard drive, but I could already hear his footsteps in the hallway. The office had only one exit, and Derek was between me and the door. I looked around desperately for another way out, and then I saw it. The window behind Derek's desk opened onto a fire escape. The building was old enough to have external fire stairs, a safety feature that might save my life for the second time in 24 hours. I managed to get the window open just as Derek's key turned in the office door lock. I slipped out onto the fire escape and pulled the window closed behind me just as Derek entered his office and turned on the lights. From outside on the fire escape, I could see Derek moving around his office, checking his computer and going through his files. He seemed suspicious, as if he sensed that someone had been there. After a few minutes, he made a phone call. "It's me," Derek said, his voice carrying clearly through the thin glass. "I think we might have a problem. Someone's been in my office." I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but Derek's responses told me everything I needed to know. "No, nothing's missing, but my computer was accessed. The surveillance photos are still there, but someone copied files." "Yes, I'm sure. It had to be tonight while I was dealing with Sarah?" More conversation, and then Derek's voice turned cold and dangerous. "Find out who it was. If someone knows about our operation, they need to be eliminated before they can cause problems. No, it can't be Maggie. She's dead." I made sure of that myself, but Derek's confidence was starting to crack. Someone had invaded his private sanctuary and stolen his secrets, and he didn't know who or why. The hunter was starting to feel like the hunted. I climbed down the fire escape and made my way back to Jack's truck, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. I now had enough evidence to destroy Derek completely: financial records, surveillance photos, and a recorded confession of murder. But I'd also learned that Derek wasn't working alone. He had partners in his criminal enterprise, dangerous people who wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who threatened their operation. And if Derek started to suspect that I might have survived the fire, he would come looking for me with everything he had. The game was entering its final phase, and the stakes had never been higher. Derek thought he'd committed the perfect crime, but he was about to discover that his victim was very much alive and fighting back. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of bringing Derek Harrison to justice. But tonight, I had to stay hidden and stay alive long enough to see my plan through to the end. In the distance, I could see the lights of Sarah's house, where my daughter was grieving for a mother who wasn't actually dead. Soon, I would be able to comfort her and explain everything. But first, I had to make sure that Derek could never hurt her or anyone else ever again. The hunter had become the hunted, and Derek Harrison was about to learn that some prey fights back. The next morning, I sat in my motel room, surrounded by evidence that could destroy Derek Harrison: financial records, surveillance photos, recorded conversations, and documentation of a criminal enterprise that stretched far beyond simple embezzlement. But I still had one more piece of the puzzle to put in place before I could safely reveal myself. I needed to make sure Derek's criminal partners couldn't disappear or retaliate when their operation was exposed. And I needed to do it in a way that would protect Sarah from any fallout. Patricia Chen arrived at my motel at 9 a.m., bringing FBI agent Rebecca Torres, a specialist in financial crimes who'd agreed to review my evidence. Agent Torres was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened intently as I explained Derek's crimes and his attempt on my life. "This is extensive," Agent Torres said, reviewing the files I'd copied from Derek's office: money laundering, wire fraud, embezzlement from multiple victims. We're talking about federal crimes with decades of prison time. "But Mrs. Whitmore, the attempted murder charge will be harder to prove without physical evidence." "I have something better than physical evidence," I said. "I have Derek himself, and he's going to confess everything on camera." Agent Torres raised an eyebrow. "How exactly do you plan to make that happen?" I smiled, feeling like the financial investigator I'd been for 35 years. "Derek thinks I'm dead, which means he'll say things he would never say if he thought I could testify against him. All we have to do is give him the right opportunity." The plan was simple but risky. I would reveal myself to Derek in a controlled environment, with FBI surveillance recording everything. Derek's shock at seeing me alive would make him careless, and his desperation to cover up his crimes would lead him to incriminate himself further. But first, I had to make sure Sarah was safe. "Agent Torres, I need you to pick up my daughter before we move on Derek. Tell her that I'm alive, but don't explain everything until she's in protective custody. Derek becomes incredibly dangerous when he feels cornered. We can have agents at her house in 30 minutes. Agent Torres confirmed. While the FBI arranged Sarah's protection, I called Jack Morrison with final instructions. Jack would position himself at the Foundation offices with a team of federal agents, ready to arrest Derek's associates when they tried to access the accounts. "Maggie, are you sure about this?" Jack asked. "Derek's already tried to kill you once. If he realizes you've exposed his entire operation, then he'll try again, but this time I'll be ready for him." At 2 p.m., Derek received a phone call that would change everything. Patricia Chen, following my instructions, called Derek's office with an urgent message. "Mr. Harrison, I'm calling about your mother-in-law's estate. We've discovered some irregularities in her financial records that need immediate attention. Can you meet me at the Foundation offices at 4 o'clock? Derek took the bait immediately. His greed and his need to control the narrative made him desperate to handle any irregularities before they could be investigated by others. What Derek didn't know was that Agent Torres and her team were already in position, with surveillance equipment recording everything that was about to happen. At 4 p.m. exactly, Derek arrived at the Henderson Foundation offices in downtown Denver. He looked confident and prepared, carrying his leather briefcase and wearing his most expensive suit. In his mind, he was walking into a meeting where he would smooth over some minor paperwork issues and secure his access to $5 billion. Instead, he was walking into a trap that would destroy him completely. Patricia met Derek in the Foundation's main conference room, a spacious area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Hidden cameras captured every angle, and FBI agents were positioned throughout the building. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Derek," Patricia said, gesturing for him to take a seat at the polished conference table. "I know this is a difficult time for you and Sarah." "Of course," Derek replied, setting down his briefcase with practiced confidence. "Maggie would want me to handle any issues with her estate promptly. What kind of irregularities are we talking about?" "Well, that's the interesting thing. The irregularities seem to involve transfers from Foundation accounts to companies associated with your consulting firm." Derek's face remained calm, but I could see tension creeping into his shoulders. "That's impossible. I've never had any direct access to foundation accounts. Are you sure about that, Derek? That's when I walked into the conference room. Derek's reaction was everything I'd hoped for and more. His face went completely white, his mouth fell open, and for several seconds, he couldn't speak at all. He looked like he was seeing a ghost, which from his perspective he was. "Hello, Derek," I said calmly, taking a seat across from him at the conference table. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Derek's hands were shaking as he gripped the edge of the table. "Maggie, but how did you all? How did I survive the fire you set? How did I escape the cabin you locked me inside to die? It's a long story, but we have plenty of time to discuss it." Derek's shock was rapidly turning to desperation. His eyes darted toward the door, calculating whether he could run, but Agent Torres chose that moment to enter the room and close the door behind her. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Agent Torres with the FBI. I need you to remain seated while we discuss some serious allegations that have been made against you." "This is insane," Derek said, his voice rising in panic. "Maggie, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you're obviously suffering from smoke inhalation and trauma. You're not thinking clearly." "My thinking is perfectly clear," I replied. "Clear enough to document every dollar you've stolen, every client you've defrauded, and every crime you've committed over the past 2 years." I opened my briefcase and began laying out documents on the conference table. Bank statements, transaction records, photos of Derek meeting with money launderers, and copies of his own computer files. Derek stared at the evidence in horror, realizing that his entire criminal operation had been exposed. "Where did you get these?" "From your office. Last night, while you were home comforting my daughter after supposedly mourning my tragic death. You broke into my office?" "I investigated a crime scene. Free. And what I found was evidence of the most extensive financial fraud I've ever encountered. You haven't just been stealing from the Henderson Foundation, Derek. You've been running a Ponzi scheme that's victimized dozens of innocent people." Derek's mask of civilization was finally cracking completely. The charming, successful businessman was disappearing, replaced by something cold and vicious. "You should have died in that fire," he snarled. "I made sure that cabin would burn hot enough to destroy everything, including you." Agent Torres leaned forward with interest. "So you did set the fire, Mr. Harrison?" Derek realized what he'd just admitted, but it was too late to take it back. His desperation made him reckless, and his words came pouring out in a torrent of rage and self-justification. "She was going to ruin everything. Years of careful planning, millions of dollars in investments, a perfect system that was helping people make money, and she wanted to destroy it all over some accounting irregularities." "You mean embezzlement?" I said quietly. "You were stealing from a children's charity?" "I was borrowing against future returns. Every penny would have been paid back with interest if you hadn't interfered. And when I discovered your crimes, you decided to murder me?" "I tried to reason with you first," Derek said, his voice becoming wheedling and desperate. "I offered you a way out that would have let you retire gracefully. But you were too stubborn, too self-righteous to accept a reasonable compromise." Agent Torres was taking notes while the hidden cameras recorded every word. "Tell us about the digitalis, Derek. Where did you get hospital-grade heart medication?" Derek's eyes widened as he realized how much evidence we actually had. "You can't prove anything. It's my word against hers, and she's a confused old woman who survived a traumatic fire." "Actually, we can prove quite a lot," Agent Torres said. "We have recordings of your phone conversations with criminal associates, surveillance footage of you meeting with money launderers, and computer records showing your access to your wife's hospital supplies. Plus," I added, "we have your own financial records documenting every crime you've committed. You kept very detailed books, Derek. They'll make the prosecution's case much easier." Derek was trapped and he knew it. His careful criminal enterprise was collapsing around him, his attempt at the perfect murder had failed. And the woman he'd tried to kill was sitting across from him with evidence that would send him to prison for the rest of his life. But Derek had one more card to play, the one that had worried me most. "Sarah," he said, his voice turning cold and calculating, "my beautiful, trusting wife who has no idea what kind of mother she really had. Sarah still thinks you died in that fire, Maggie. She's grieving for you, blaming herself for leaving you alone. What do you think it will do to her when she learns that her beloved mother has been alive this whole time? Letting her suffer unnecessarily. It was a cruel psychological attack, designed to make me feel guilty for the choices I'd made to protect my daughter." But I'd had time to prepare for this moment. Sarah will understand why I had to stay hidden, I said calmly, because Sarah is a nurse who's trained to recognize sociopaths and manipulators. She'll understand that I was protecting her from a man who'd already committed murder and wouldn't hesitate to kill again. She'll never forgive you for putting her through this grief. Maybe not immediately. But she'll forgive me a lot faster than she'll forgive you for trying to murder her mother. That's when Derek made his final, desperate move. He lunged across the conference table, grabbing for my throat with both hands, his face twisted with rage and desperation.
You stupid old bitch!
You've ruined everything. But Derek had forgotten that Agent Torres was an FBI agent trained in tactical response. Before his hands could reach me, Torres had Derek on the ground with his arms pinned behind his back. Derek Harrison, you're under arrest for attempted murder, arson, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes, Torres said as she handcuffed him. You have the right to remain silent. As Torres read Derek his rights, he looked up at me from the floor with pure hatred in his eyes. This isn't over, Maggie. I have associates who won't let you destroy years of work. They'll come for you, and next time you won't be so lucky. Your associates are already in custody, Agent Torres informed him. We arrested them 2 hours ago when they tried to access the offshore accounts. Your entire network has been rolled up. Derek's face went slack with defeat as the reality of his situation finally hit him. His criminal empire was destroyed, his attempt at murder had failed, and he was facing life in prison. The man who'd thought he could commit the perfect crime had been outmaneuvered by the elderly woman he'd tried to kill. After Derek was taken away, I sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes, processing everything that had happened. It was over. Derek would spend the rest of his life in prison. The stolen money would be returned to his victims, and the Henderson Foundation could continue its work helping children. But I still had one more thing to do. The hardest thing of all. I had to face my daughter and explain why I'd let her believe I was dead. Agent Torres drove me to the safe house where Sarah was being protected. The FBI had told her that I was alive, but hadn't explained the circumstances. As we pulled into the driveway, I could see Sarah pacing anxiously in the front window. The moment I stepped out of the car, Sarah burst through the front door and ran toward me, tears streaming down her face. Mom, oh God, Mom, they said you were alive, but I couldn't believe it. How is this possible? Derek said you died in the fire. I held my daughter as she sobbed against my shoulder, feeling the weight of the guilt and relief I'd been carrying for the past 2 days. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. It took 3 hours to explain everything. Derek's crimes, his attempt to murder me, the fire, and why I'd had to stay hidden to build a case against him. Sarah listened in shocked silence, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just trying to process the fact that the man she'd loved and trusted had tried to kill her mother. I can't believe I was married to a monster, Sarah said finally. How did I not see it? How did I not know what kind of person he really was? Because Derek is a skilled manipulator who spent years perfecting his mask of normalcy. Even I didn't realize how dangerous he was until it was almost too late. But you figured it out in time. You survived, and you stopped him. Sarah wiped her eyes and looked at me with something that might have been admiration. Mom, you're 72 years old, and you just took down a criminal enterprise single-handedly. Not single-handedly. I had help from good people like Jack Morrison and Patricia Chen. And you helped too. Even though you didn't know it. How did I help? By being the daughter I raised you to be. Derek thought he could manipulate both of us, but he underestimated the strength of our family bond. He never understood that I would risk everything to protect you, and that you would understand why I had to do it. 3 months later, Derek Harrison was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His criminal associates received similar sentences, and over $40 million in stolen funds were returned to his victims. The Henderson Foundation resumed its work with enhanced security protocols, and I stepped down as manager to let younger, more tech-savvy administrators take over. At 72, I'd earned the right to a peaceful retirement. Sarah and I are closer now than we've ever been. The trauma of Derek's betrayal brought us together in ways that normal family experiences never could. She's started dating again, a nice emergency room doctor who's been thoroughly investigated by both the FBI and her paranoid mother. I built a new cabin on the same mountain land, incorporating all of Robert's security features plus some modern upgrades suggested by the FBI. Jack Morrison visits regularly, And we've become close friends united by our shared experience of hunting down a killer. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, smelling smoke and remembering the terror of being trapped in a burning cabin by my own son-in-law. But then I remember that I survived, that I fought back, and that justice was served. Derek thought he could murder a helpless old woman and steal $5 billion from sick children. Instead, he discovered that some people, regardless of their age, will never give up, never surrender, and never let evil triumph over good. I'm 72 years old, and I'm nobody's victim. My name is Margaret Whitmore, and this is my story of survival, justice, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter. Derek Harrison thought he'd locked me inside a burning cabin to steal $5 billion. When he came back, I had proof of every crime he'd committed and the courage to use it. Sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted, and sometimes an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind is more dangerous than any criminal expects. Justice served cold is still justice, and it tastes sweeter than any revenge.